Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. In the first story, we'll tell you about the situation our OP got into when he closed the restaurant. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. You think you're entitled to service after we close? I hope you can pay. I've been working at a Subway restaurant for the past 2 years, from the end of high school through my first year of college. I take classes in the morning and afternoon, so when I work, it's usually a closing shift. The only issue is I close by myself, so it really toys with my anxiety whenever I get a rush or can't finish certain duties by a certain time, etc. So by the end of the night, I'm usually so out of it mentally, I just want to get home ASAP. We close at 10. So tonight I was closing like usual, and I really wanted to get home as early as I could to finish an assignment due at midnight. Of course, with my luck, it turns out being one of the busiest nights we've had in a while because they recently sent out coupons for BOGO footlong after 4 p.m. Such a effing dumbass move, especially for alone closers. So by the time 10 o'clock rolls around, I'm effing finishing up the dishes, cleaning the line, counting the bread, wraps, bowls, etc., and I go to lock the door at 10, and as I'm turning off the open sign, a guy walks in and I tell him, "Sorry, we're closed." He wittily responds, "Then how'd I get in here?" I respond, "I was walking to lock the door right now. You have to leave, sir." "No, I want a sandwich." At this point, I'm just thinking, if this guy's ballsy enough to tell a business worker to stay open after hours because he wants service, then IDK what he could do. So I decide to make him his sandwich to just make him go away. He proceeds to take a good 2 to 3 minutes more just staring at the menu. OMG, I was fuming. Every dagger imaginable coming from my eyes was hitting his stare. I make his sandwich, then we move to the POS cash register. I go to put in the sandwich, tell him his total. He pulls out a $50 bill. Holy crap, I get so effing excited because we can't accept bills over 20, and I pray he doesn't have any other method of pay. I tell him the bad news. He, of course, gets angry, saying to break it anyway. Well, good thing I just dropped most of the money from the register into our safe before I went to lock up, so I literally couldn't give him proper change for the 50. I explain it to him as I slide his sub to the side where he can't reach it, and he just leaves in a fit of rage. I proceeded to then take that sub home and eat it while finishing up my assignment and turning it in on time. Honestly, if he wasn't such a commanding D, I would have just given him the sub and told him not to worry about it. But if you're going to force me to do my job past our posted hours and be a jerk about it, you're not getting a break. And our second story. Clerk tries not to let a woman abandon her reservation, but she insists. I live near Chicago. My parents are near Knoxville. One summer, my wife wasn't able to take time off, but I was. I decided my son and I would drive down to my parents', but stop in Cincinnati and do Kings Island. Understand, the year before, we'd made a visit to Great America, and my son had refused to try any roller coasters. Early in the summer of this story, we'd visited a small theme park and convinced him to try the kiddie roller coaster. He loved it and went through again and again. Over the course of the day, we worked our way up until he'd tried and enjoyed them all. We left early and drove to Cincinnati with an expensive reservation in their hotel, but it's just once that you get to introduce your son to roller coasters at a major theme park. The plan was to drive straight through to Knoxville and my parents. But I hadn't planned for how my 40-plus-year-old self could deal with a long day in the August heat. Not far into Kentucky, it became clear that I should not be driving, let alone should not be driving for hours. Even though I couldn't afford it, I decided I'd have to stop and sleep. A few exits north of Lexington, I pulled off and hit the first motel. No rooms available. No problem. There were 2 other motels. No rooms at the next one. When there were no rooms at the third, we asked, WTF? I learned the Cincinnati Bengals did summer training in Lexington, and their first exhibition game was tomorrow. The next exit had 2 motels. No rooms. At the following one, I was really worried about my safety on the road and contemplating sleeping in the car. I'm 6'4", and the car was a Pontiac Vibe. This thought was not exciting. The first 2 options were also booked. At the third, there was a line of 2 people in front of me. It's close to 11 p.m. I'm past exhausted and into that dull buzz where you're way past where you should be asleep. The first guy in line asks for a room and is told there are none. He begs and pleads, but the clerk is implacable. I should have left then. I'd love to say that some sixth sense told me to stay, but the truth is, my degraded mental capacity didn't let me realize that. After he left, the woman in front of me stepped up. She had a reservation. It was apparently past the guaranteed time, but they'd held something for her. She had a suite reserved, but all they had left was a room with 2 queen beds. She went ballistic. The stream of profanity was truly awesome to behold. She went off for some time. The clerk was praisingly professional and did not respond like I would have. He explained that she was actually checking in well past the guaranteed check-in time, but that they'd held a room for her. There was lots of back and forth, with the woman treating him with utter privileged contempt and abuse, and he responding with absolute professionalism. It ended with her basically saying, "F you, I want nothing to do with an establishment that would treat me this way. I'll take my business elsewhere." To his credit, he tried to explain the Bengal situation meant there may be no other options, that he couldn't hold her reservation if she left, and that she should take what she can get. She stormed out with more profanities. Needless to say, this adrenaline-inducing enraged some of my higher brain functions that had turned off. Once she was out the door, I stepped up, smiled, and asked if there were any rooms available. That guy was a consummate professional. I could barely detect the glee as he tapped on his keyboard and said, "As a matter of fact, I just have one room open. Would you like it?" I slept well that night. And our last story. Just because you can't do your job doesn't mean you can blame me. My brother, let's call him Mark, is a qualified automotive engineer, working as a contractor for a company in the UK. According to him, he loves his job. He gets good pay. At times he gets to work from home or even further away from it, and he has plenty of free time while still earning a very tidy wage. I'm not going into detail here. He loves his job and is more than happy with the people there. Well, except one guy, a project lead or manager, I forget which, who wasn't Mark's direct superior, but was still higher up the chain than him. We'll call him Dave. Everyone knows Dave. He's about as common as Kevin. Dave was a relatively new guy to the company and began by working on a project at a time for the company, doing good work until they doubled his workload by adding another project to his list of things to do. According to what I've heard, Dave had been bragging at the time about finding the work easy to do, and I'd heard that he'd got a good raise out of it, so I'm guessing he was effectively promoted. It was at this point that Dave just couldn't keep up. He couldn't deliver on what was expected of him, but the company kept him on. Never heard from Mark why, but from what happened, I can make theories. So Mark is assigned to work on a couple of projects for Dave while still reporting to his own manager, and as they're going through, he notices almost instantly the problems coming up. Dave is rushing and making mistakes in the plans and trying to get all the jobs done, and when Mark tries to point out problems, they're not problems, they're perfectly fine. And because there's a good chance the engine will fall out of the car, doesn't mean a thing. When these were flagged, the company had to fix the issues and indeed had to pay a penalty for failing to deliver on a contract. Mark was showing he was a good working and showing that Dave was not as good as upper management seemed to think he was. Then came Dave the micromanager. During a very rough contract, Mark was doing the same work of, in his words, 2.5 engineers in the office for about 1.5 the pay. He went into detail on how half his week was spent on one project, the other half on a different unrelated project. One of these projects was under Dave's direct management, so he had no choice but to do the work and report to him, and this is where things start getting bad. You see, for all the work Mark was doing, Dave was taking the credit, not to mention he was starting to bombard Mark with phone calls on his days off, telling him that there was work still needing doing. He needed him at a meeting. He needed this. He needed that. He could never do right. LPT, take a note of everything that happens. Mark begins making a log of everything that's being said. Emails, phone calls, times, dates, actions, the works, and talks to his own manager. Apparently, Dave has a bit of a reputation of being promoted beyond his competence and is desperate to keep the job. At this point, they can't do much but keep track of it, as there's not a real issue to deal with yet. My own interjection here was, what do you mean? Well, he was getting to that. Dave had a massive project coming up, strict deadlines, hard work, things needed to be absolutely perfect. Contractors couldn't sign off on work that had been done as it was company property, not the contractors. I understand the law, but I don't understand why they can't sign it. Working on the project to the point where they can begin fabricating a model off-site, Dave almost storms into the office Mark and 3 co-workers are and demands that he sign off on the project. This turns into an argument, one in which Dave finishes by threatening to take his job from him if he doesn't sign for it. Forced into a corner, Mark signs, and Dave leaves almost wistfully. Mark's manager arrives later, hearing that Mark signed for a project, and they all explain what happened. This was sadly the final straw for my brother. He gave in his notice at that point, and this was him being kind, telling them he was seeking employment elsewhere due to this, and I quote, cocky bag of wank that couldn't tell which end of the pen to stick up his own arse. This is the spark that they needed. With Mark leaving, he signs an official complaint against Dave, and before he leaves for another job, with better pay apparently, he leaves Dave, who knew the complaint was coming, with one line of wisdom. Just because you can't do your job doesn't mean you can blame me. After he left, Mark's phone was almost on fire with missed calls from Dave, about 50 in the space of 3 hours, along with an accompanying voicemail. He didn't even listen to them, just ignored them and went on his way. Apparently, the job Mark had signed off on was found to be faulty as all hell, and if it had been put into anything, the parts of the engine it was holding up would bang against every speed bump it could find. Suffice to say, Dave lost his job, he got a severance package, and last Mark knew there was no chance in hell of him ever getting anything like a management job in the next few years. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.